We're going to take a break this week from our Mark study, and we're going to look in Daniel chapter 3 and look at the idea that he's still God in our life, and he's still God wherever we are, and regardless of what's happening around us. And what got me thinking about this was thinking about just a couple days ago was Constitution Day. And I started thinking about America and the Constitution and freedom and the freedoms that we celebrate compared to the freedoms that we ought to celebrate. And I look at us and the way things are going on in this world, and I look at Christians and churches and the attitude in societies right now. And I think there's times when we need to be reminded of the freedoms that we have. I was reading here a while back about a pastor at a Baptist church in North Carolina. And he had gotten a little too into politics in his sermons. And in one of his sermons, even during the Bush-Kerry presidential election, basically told everyone if you were going to vote for John Kerry, you desperately needed to repent and find Jesus in your life. And naturally to say, it didn't go over real well with Democrats in the church, and it caused a major rift in that church, and in fact it broke it in half, and because the pastor, strong to his convictions, wasn't willing to change, wasn't willing to look at it in any other way. And so this pastor leaves his church, Pastor Chandler, along with half of the congregation with him. And, it started me thinking about religion and politics, this illustrates, I think, this idea in religion and politics, something that happens in our entire nation right now, something that happens. It's this interface that we have of religion and politics. And when you think about it, there's this culture war that's waged with the heavy religious artillery. The battlefronts, prayer in public school, the Ten Commandments being displayed publicly, under God and the Pledge of Allegiance, and the public tax dollars for private schools and for faith-based schools, and the list goes on and on. And when we think about this, we think about the separation of church and state. And I want you to think about this idea of soul freedom. Soul freedom. Now, soul freedom is the fact that we are free to live our lives. And when you look at soul freedom and the freedom that God gave us to choose how to live our lives and the separation of church and state, I want us to think a little bit about this. Now, the understanding of this soul freedom is that freedom is God's gift to humankind. It comes from no one else but God. Now, Adam and Eve, they were given in the Garden of Eden, they were given a command by God, but they were also given the freedom to disobey that command. So the ability to listen to what God's called upon us, or to defy God, that was their freedom. And it's our freedom still. That freedom was theirs. And later in the biblical story, the mournful voices of Israel's prophets and the psalmists, they spoke and they called out, they speak for God, "Oh, that my people would listen to me, that Israel would walk in my ways," Psalms 81:13. But they wouldn't. And nonetheless, what did God do? He preserved them in this freedom, and to stay or to go. And even later in the biblical story, we learn of Jesus, who comes to set us free from death and to grant us a liberty that he gives to the children of God, the liberty to serve God with glad and thankful hearts. But once again, God never pushed that down our throats. He gave us a soul freedom to choose. And so from this foundational understanding, this basic understanding of soul freedom, I come to this, a simple but a far-reaching conclusion. See, the thing is time and time again in our lives and biblical stories, we see that faith can never be compelled. See, in order for faith to be faith, it has to be freely chosen and it has to be made voluntarily. It has to be given in faith and in order to be faith. And so otherwise it's just a meaningless sham. And this is going to correlate to our story here with Nebuchadnezzar and the fiery furnace in a minute here. But it's this voluntarily given faith that we choose to follow God and to do so. And within the Christian family tree, historically, Christians have sat on many times on this rebellious limb. From our birth in the early 1600s in England, the battle cry of Christians who wanted to be free was "Give us freedom." This was before we came over into the colonies. This soul freedom was being fought for in England, where, of course, the government ran the church. And the Christians said to Protestants and Baptists and Lutherans alike, said to the established church and the government of England, don't tell us what we have to believe. It's our right and it's our responsibility to come up with that on our own. And some pastors like John Bunyan spent years in jail. And when these Christians came to America and to the colonies, they said the same thing to the established churches in the colonies. And for doing so, they were whipped and they were fined and they were run out of town. Soul freedom, though, was that important to the early Christians. And they endured this persecution, not just to gain their own freedom, but the freedom of all, even those whose convictions were distasteful to them. Ours wasn't just this self-serving campaign for the toleration of Christianity, but a radical call for the full and the free practice of soul freedom and soul liberty for everyone. Now, the First Amendment to our Constitution, this is an amendment that Madison introduced and championed, but it says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So if you begin with that belief and take that belief of voluntary faith is the only valid faith, then it leads you sometimes to these unexpected political places. You wind up where to some people you might even appear to be anti-God or anti-prayer. Now we'll see in the debate over school prayer is I see this different than a lot of people do. And when we look at this freedom in prayer in school, because soul freedom is the only soil that faith can grow from. We see the removal of the mandated prayers in schools as a bad thing, but in truth, I argue it's actually a good thing. Instead of being provided with a government-sponsored, a government-endorsed prayer to say, now children today have the right to their freedom. They have a choice to pray or to not pray. In school today, children can pray in school every day today. That freedom wasn't taken away. What was given to them is that soul freedom was honored. It's in the hands of pastors like me and church people like you to make the case for faith and to help others nurture it and to mature in it. And so we have to look at that historical rock and that we came from and reclaim that audacious faith that our forefathers had and in the power of our gospel. A lot of the choir in the churches today is that insists that America once was and has to again become a Christian nation. And many leaders in this choir, they'll offer their revisionist histories of our founders, stubbornness to that exact idea that these advocates for this Christian America, though, always fail to specify which flavor of Christianity it should be. Now, what kind of a Christian nation would America be? Would it be the Protestant fundamentalist version? Or would it be the enlightened liberal version, or the Mormon version, or the Roman or the Orthodox Catholic version? I mean, think of it. We'd be setting ourselves up to a point where the U.S. Supreme Court, who has its own critics now, are the final say in matters of religion. See, believe me, I share the same concerns that so many do that are alarmed, but these are unnerving times. And before we start to join the chorus of those that want to mandate our religious practices, our religious beliefs and slogans that we say need to dominate the culture, let history give us some insight. In 1787, as soon as the Constitution of the United States was presented to the states for their ratification, people of faith were alarmed by how little religion was actually in it. Why there wasn't a single mention of God within it. And this bothered them, and it explicitly rejected any religious qualification for office holders. And furthermore, even the First Amendment proposing to outlaw the possibility even of assistance to any religions. And many religious leaders instead then turned and put these religious requirements into their own states' constitutions. But then year by year, over the next 35 years, one by one, those statutes were repealed because soul freedom proved its worth and its wisdom. Lyman Beecher was a pastor in Connecticut who at the time opposed this movement to deestablish the congregational church in that state. Connecticut had its own state church, and he oversaw it. And in his memoirs, he wrote that the day it was decided to separate church and state and that freedom, he said, was as dark a day as I ever saw. He said when we lost that battle, but in retrospect, he said it was the best thing that ever happened to the state of Connecticut because it cut the churches loose from dependence on state support. It threw them wholly on their own resources and on God. Losing the crutch of government helped the church to walk, and soul freedom worked. And today, we're called on to display a similar faith and freedom. You know, our nation now includes people of all religions and of no religions. And to be honest, I think right now, if you added up those of non-Christian religions along with the atheists, we're outnumbered. And so now we should thank God for the separation of church and state. We're called upon today, though, to display our faith in this freedom and to display the faith in the gospel that we were taught. Just as we're going to see in our lesson this morning. But we have to ask ourselves, do we really believe that Jesus is lifted up? When he's lifted up, he'll draw men unto himself. Or is our belief that it's when Jesus is lifted up, he needs the assistance of the government to accomplish his work? See, so much of today's push for a Christian America reminds me a lot of the replay of what the Israelites wanted with Jesus back in his day. They would have made him king right then and there, and what did he do? He fled away from them. He fled away, and he's not going to be pushed into that, not even today. We have a redeeming, glad, good news for the lost world, and it's that freedom's holy light. Always draws those who will be warmed, who will see. And so we have to dare to trust that light, and we need to preserve our soul freedom and not just celebrate the freedom of choice that we have in America. We're going to talk about King Nebuchadnezzar.